Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
Welcome back, everyone, to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute, a podcast celebrating the films of Gene Wilder 1 minute at a time. And we are at the final and last minute of our Season 1 Young Frankenstein. And no funny quip here, no funny one-liner here, just I feel now what Gene Wilder must have felt like when he went to Mel Brooks and said, "Can't we come up with more to film?" I'm Alan Sanders. I'm your host.
I'm Walt Murray, your co-host, and I'm feeling the exact same way.
I mean, I don't know what I was expecting when I was going to go on the mic. I mean, you and I knew we were going to be doing this. We realized the day would eventually come where we have to put the capstone on Season 1. And we had a cool idea, and that's going to be today's episode. I think we've got, a pretty neat episode coming forward. But to open it up, I'm suddenly going, wow. It's almost, it's emotional.
Well, and I still feel like I've got a lot to say about the movie, and we've had, what did you tell me earlier this week? Like 30 or 60 hours
over
of content.
60 hours of content when you go add up all of the episodes. Yeah.
If you can't say it in 60 hours.
Yeah, something's wrong. It's a little over an hour and a half movie.
Yeah, so this worked out just the way they intended.
We absolutely exploded that timeline. We have some of our most loyal listeners are still trying to battle through to the end because you just get days where you fall behind. it's hard. You got to carve out time, and when you see an episode, you look down and go, 40 damn minutes. What in the hell?
Yeah, and you think, okay, what is my ride to work?
Right. I actually have a couple of friends who are like, I only have like a 20-minute ride to work. I don't want to.
That gives you a 20-minute ride home, too.
I said, well, just listen to the first half on the way there, the back half on the way home.
Yeah, what are you doing at lunch?
What are you doing at work?
Right. Take the day off.
It's like, you're on Facebook anyway. You might as well just put the earbuds in and just,
Exactly.
Like, how was at work? Okay.
Well, and then when you would get done editing and hand stuff off to me, and it's like, I'd wake up and look at my phone. I'm like, you jackass, you dropped 6 episodes last night. How am I going to listen to that?
Yeah, because we would also review the issue that dropped that day, and
That's
then
right.
have to preview the stuff that would be dropping later because I always needed you to double check because you caught a couple of things. I mean, we're learning as we go. I mean, I think my process got better and faster as it went along. It's still a lot of work, but I felt a lot better. I think maybe post minute 40, like the first 40 almost, which ironically were the first 40 in the bank. I felt
That's right.
like these were taking 3 and 4 hours an episode to edit, and I got them down to about an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending how long the episode. Because I would look up clips. I would want to put stuff from the movie. I'd look up something. Sometimes things would just pop into my head, like, "Oh, we mentioned a Back to the Future reference. Can I get a Back to the Future line?" So go find the Back to the Future movie, or go to YouTube or find something and try to bring it in, make sure it sounded okay, and insert it. So
there were
I've
times
enjoyed
too,
that.
Yeah, and those were great. And as I think as we developed and got into those, minutes 50 and on, the podcast matured. But I also think at that point we started having a lot of listener input too. So we were able to kind of look at what people were posting on Facebook. It got us thinking in certain directions. And we were like, yeah, we really need to talk about that. Or, that's something that really hasn't come up yet. And so that started to influence how the podcast went too.
I think overall, the part, because we're going to ask ourselves the same questions that we asked some of our guests to answer, and so we've got, which is kind of cool. I think can we say what we're going to do?
Oh, I think
We've invited. We actually invited almost everyone, but people are busy. It was right in the midst of back to school. I know a lot of people with parents were getting either kids back to school or back to college, so we knew not everybody was going to be able to send us something. But we reached out to our guests that we had this season and asked if they would want to maybe send us their thoughts as closing, rather than, because the credits here, we already examined the credits in the opening of the movie.
Yeah, and ad nauseum, thanks to the way that they had them set up in the first 5 minutes.
And, the last minute really is just sort of that old-fashioned way of just put as many credits on the screen, don't scroll them, just like a screenshot, done, the end. So I think it made more sense to maybe revisit some of the voices we had with us in season 1. So we're going to have some of the folks come back and tell us some of their thoughts. And so I think it'd be cool if you and I maybe answered some of those same questions along the way.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
So the first question I have is for your thoughts as it relates to our very first guest we're going to get to, who actually happened to be our very first guest, and that was Matt Gray. And one of the things that we wanted to know, and we took a risk bringing in basically a 20-something who had never seen the movie. And we said, well, we don't want to just do a podcast for, 40-somethings or 50-somethings. We want to know, is this movie still relevant? And we wanted to right away dive in. Let's get Matt Gray to weigh in on it. So my question to you before we get Matt's thoughts, were you worried that this movie had outgrown the younger audience?
I actually was. And when, I've known Matt for quite a while. We've worked together for a couple of years. So I knew that Matt was going to be strong, and we have a good chemistry among the three of us. But I kind of worried about, when Matt sits down and watches this, I knew that he and his brother were going to watch it together. What are they going to think? Is this just an old, outdated movie? Does the comedy stand up? I think the comedy in many ways stands up to me because it's just a movie I've always loved, and so there's some nostalgia there. But I was excited to hear that he enjoys the movie as much as we do. He takes a little bit different look at it, because he's a millennial, and he'll mention that in some of his comments. But I was excited to hear that he was just, and he's since passed it along to some other people. We've had some discussions in our office. Some of the other millennials have now seen it. And they all kind of echo what he said, that it is now one of those great comedy movies that they're going to go to every October.
One of the things that, I was worried as well, because my daughters hadn't seen it yet. They hadn't commented on it. My one daughter's actually working her way through the podcast as we speak. And so we sat through it. I only got to sit through it with one of my girls, Lexi, and she didn't make a sound through much of it. She only laughed out loud just once. And I started sitting there worried. I said, oh, because she's got a really good sense of humor. My oldest daughter has a really good sense of humor. I mean, they all really do, but I said, Lexi tends to be one of those people that's going to... I was expecting the pity laugh, I should probably like this because Dad's in the room, And she didn't, and then when I got done, I was like, did you like it? She goes, I really did, but I think there's just so much to digest. It's hard. And I realized the comedies of today are so different than this one. You end up just watching it the first time. I think when you don't know what's coming your way and you've never experienced a movie like this, it's almost like you don't know how to respond. You don't have a buffer. You don't have other silly movies of this same kind of the 70s movies of the History of the Worlds or any of the Monty Python stuff or anything that just gets you automatically laughing because you have that high sense of comedy. Not to say that she doesn't. It's just, I think watching it then a second and a third time, it becomes funnier for somebody who doesn't have that buffer that you and I had growing up.
That's right. And I think a lot of the comedies today tend to go to the gross anatomy joke when they need a laugh instead of going to something smart. And, we'll talk about a little bit later some of our favorite gags in the movie and things like that. But I just think of those things and how powerfully funny they are in those moments. So I think that Matt kind of looked at it and sees this as a very smart comedy.
Yeah, he does. I think he recognizes it, and I think to an extent, I almost think though he doesn't say it, because he'll be coming up here in a second, I almost feel like he wishes there were more comedies more like this. Something meatier, something that there's more substance to it. Because I'm going to use an example of a movie that the wife and I bought on Blu-ray because everyone was saying it's the funniest comedy of the summer. And we don't get a chance to get to the movies all that much. And we got Bridesmaids.
Oh, yeah.
Now, there were some funny moments, but too many of the humor bits were, hey, let's just go for the gross out. Hey, let's just go for the visual gag. Hey, let's go for the gag that would never, ever work in the real world, but it's funny because it's so stupid.
Right.
And it was so disappointing. It was one of the most disappointing movies I ever sat through because about the only thing that was worthwhile was a lot of the Melissa McCarthy stuff because I think she tends to be a smarter actress, but she finds herself even today in dumb comedies.
Right.
And, so for this, I think Matt picks up on what you and I like about this. There's more to it. You can have the slapstick. You can have the silly humor. You can have the innuendo. You can have the gross out. But at the same time, give us some substance.
Yeah. My daughters were dying to see The Spy Who Dumped Me. And so we went and saw it. I wish I'd read more before I went.
See, I thought that looked cute, but you're telling me it's not so good, huh?
Well, it's good, but it is a lot of quick cuts. There's a lot of good action in it, and some of the humor is really good. But I think that what I've been used to from Mila Kunis That 70s Show. And
Maya, she's a cutie.
Yeah, she is. And she's smart. You know, I mean, like, she speaks Russian. I mean, she is a very smart person. And I think this movie kind of spoiled me, because when you are used to the humor of Young Frankenstein and then you go see something else, it's like, okay, now I'm going to judge everything else against Gene Wilder. And it's hardly fair to some of those movies, because this crew that they put together for this movie is probably, I will say, unmatched. You're going to have a hard time finding a comedy lineup like this in any other movie ever. And all of them really at the peak of their game.
I agree. Well, let's see how Matt felt about his involvement with this podcast. He was actually our very first guest in minutes 6, 7, and 10, because you and I did the first week alone. We knew there were so many credits. We said, let's not bring in a guest and bore them with the background of the music director and art director and the director and the actors. We just took care of that ourselves. But he joined us with minutes 6, 7, and 10. Came back with a buddy of yours that you work with as well, Ben Peacock, for minutes 31 through 35. And then he enjoyed it so much, we had 3 minutes we needed to fill. We had a bunch of switching around on the back half of this podcast. And we brought him in for minutes 81, 82, and 83. And I think a guy like Matt really melded well with us, because you and I, we have no problem taking shots at each other as much as taking shots at ourselves.
Absolutely.
And I think he has that self-deprecating humor that worked for him as well. In fact, I think he took more shots at himself than the both of us combined.
Oh, definitely. And he was like always on edge waiting for us to take a shot. So,
all right, well, here we go. Here's Madman Gray on the Wilder Ride.
Well, hello, Wilder Ride listeners. It's your favorite guest, Matt Gray, of course, giving my final thoughts on the movie that we just went over this entire podcast, Young Frankenstein. Now, I'm sure, as you know by now, it's been mentioned a few times, I'm a millennial. I was born in the 90s. I didn't grow up with comedy movies like this. Not to say that comedy movies now are bad or anything of the sort, but we'll say that they're different now. And I was invited on this podcast by Walt and Allen, and they said, here, watch Young Frankenstein for the first time, and you can come on, and we'll talk about it 1 minute at a time. And I was a little nervous at first, obviously. I didn't know if I would find it funny at all. I've seen 70s and 80s movies before with my parents, and they begrudgingly made me watch it with them. And I wasn't always entertained. Sometimes they fall into the trap of being too in the times and too relevant to that time that I would not understand. But for some reason, this movie just seemed to stay completely out of anything relevant at that time. And they just seemed to want to make a comedic, funny movie. And you know what? They succeeded. All the jokes, any gag, anything in there would just seem to be something that was happening in the moment, not anything you would have had to understand if you were alive in the 80s. I can point back to my favorite gag, probably Inspector Kemp playing darts with Frankenstein. There was nothing particularly insane or crazy about it, but just him faking the dart throws, foom, 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 just to seem as if he's a better competitor, just got me laughing, and as it should. Like I said, I'd never seen this before, so I don't really have any previous thoughts about this movie. It was non-existent to me, but I've also watched this movie with my father, as I mentioned in a previous episode, and I'm glad to say that there were no real differences between what we both found funny, because like I said, it was all just so universal. He'd seen it before once. I don't think he'd seen it since college, maybe. This was my first time, and you know what? We both laughed at the exact same jokes, and nothing too slapstick, nothing too stupid. It was just all good humor at the expense of whatever was happening in that moment. I've also seen Blazing Saddles before. That's another Gene Wilder movie and Mel Brooks movie. And comparing these two films, this one more seems to be more about the smart humor as opposed to the loud slapstick or more physical humor that maybe Blazing Saddles would have provided. And both great movies in their own right, but I think you get to see the creative differences between the two that Mel Brooks decided to make. And as I've said, I've only seen a few Gene Wilder movies in total, but I think the sense that I've got from him as an actor or as a person, he seems genuine, he seems like he's good at his craft, and that he really gives all to his performance no matter what he's doing, whether it's comedic or serious, which there were plenty of serious acting moments in this Young Frankenstein movie that he perfectly played out. So I don't think it seems to matter to him whether or not he's trying to be the comedic focal point or not. He just gives 100% and it always seems to work out. I think that when it's all said and done, I would have no issue watching this movie again, even with some of my other 20-year-old friends, you know? I bet they would find it just as funny as I did. And, of course, I would like to thank Walt and Allen for having me on. They took a big risk, I'll say that. But you know what? It ended up working out, I think. And as far as minute-by-minute podcasts go, I think they've got a pretty solid one going on here. Thanks again, guys.
And there you have it, Matt, Madman Gray, with his comments. And I think he kind of reinforced a lot of stuff you and I were chatting about. That I think my favorite comment that he made, which makes me feel good being a dad, is that watching this movie with his dad, liking the same things, laughing in the same spots, and really sort of
is funny.
Connecting, you know?
Yeah, and I'm not surprised that he said that his favorite part of the movie was Inspector Kemp throwing darts.
Yeah, especially the fake...
Yeah. That just seems like something Matt would really like, and that was a classic moment in the movie. And I almost said Professor Kemp. Inspector Kemp is such an awesome character. So, and I'm sure some of the other folks will mention him as well. But in many ways, he really was the capstone to this movie. He was such a great character.
Do you realize he was also our first guest who had never seen this movie? And we actually start the movie with a guest who has never seen it. And we wrapped up the last week with 2 back-to-back guests who had never seen the movie.
That's crazy.
Isn't that wild?
That's crazy. Particularly being this movie, because so many of us growing up saw it multiple times, and it wasn't even a cult classic. It was just a movie that everybody saw.
Right. This didn't gain stature over time. This was one of the biggest blockbusters of 1974.
Yeah.
That and Blazing Saddles. We talk about that even in the run of the podcast this season, that Mel Brooks was on top of the world after 1974.
What a crazy year.
I mean, to own 2 movies at the same time and the 2 biggest blockbusters of 1974. I mean, that's why he was able to do whatever he wanted after that.
Yeah, particularly at a time where production wasn't, done instantly, and you didn't have a huge team working on it, and the producer-director was right in the middle of it. That's amazing.
Well, let's move to a pair of guests. We actually had a couple of pairs of guests, but this pair is kind of neat because they actually had us on their podcast to help us promote the show before we had the first episode ever airing.
Yeah, these guys were great. I really appreciate them taking us down there. And if you have not listened to the Radio Labyrinth, you owe it to yourself to do that. Same places you find us, just about any podcatcher. Radio Labyrinth, that's produced by some of the guys down at WSB Radio in Atlanta. And it is really fantastic. It is not for the kids. It is
not safe for work.
It is not safe for work.
You may not be working, but you'll definitely be out of a job if you let this play on your loudspeakers.
Yes, you will. So be wise about where you listen. But they talk about a lot of pop culture stuff, and I've picked up on a lot of podcasts that they've mentioned, a lot of TV shows and other things. I now have a growing list of stuff I need to watch and listen to.
See, that's the problem. As I keep adding more podcasts to the library of downloads, then I have time to listen to the library of downloads.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And then
But I do make room for these guys, simply not only because we're colleagues. Tim Andrews and I both work at WSB. He's full-time with the Von Hessler Doctrine, but he's been a podcaster for a little while. Their show comes out every Friday, usually. You can check it out online. It's obviously like any podcast. There's a whole library back there. Jeff Lieboff is actually the guy who's one of his best friends, who is one of the many co-hosts who actually kind of caught wind of what we were doing. And Jeff really, I think, is the one who kind of put that push to, hey, let's get these guys on, because he is a huge Gene Wilder fan.
Yeah, and he probably knows more about Gene Wilder than Gene Wilder's mom.
I want you to pay close attention here, because, first of all, I don't know how many exotic medications Tim Andrews has taken over his many years of radio and concert going, but that guy can't tell time. He doesn't know how many days he was on the show. It's on the website. He can go look it up if he wants. But then,
and he was here.
Yeah, but Jeff, you listen to what he says. He blatantly says he didn't learn a thing. And then like a minute and a half later says, quote, "There's a lot more that I know about this show now thanks to the podcast." So he didn't learn anything, but there's a lot more he knows.
Yes.
If you can figure out how to untangle that knot, but we're all in good fun. Those guys were fantastic to have us on. In fact, it was just the 4 of us for that whole podcast of the Radio Labyrinth. It was a special, hey, let's talk about these guys putting on this show, The Wilder Ride. And we owned it.
And then, Tim, of course, is on WSB during the day. So I would encourage everybody to listen to Radio Labyrinth if you're local or if you want to get on their app from 9 to 11, 9 to noon now.
9 to noon now, yeah.
And Tim is on that lineup.
The Von Hessler Doctrine. On WSB Radio, you can find the WSB Radio app. It's your same stores, iTunes and Google Play. It's a free app, and then you can stream wherever you are. And they even do a podcast half hour now. And I don't know if they bundle everything. I don't know how that works. They may bundle everything or just that last half hour. But 3 hours a day live in Atlanta.
And they're live streaming it now on Facebook, on the Von Hessler Doctrine Facebook page.
So check it out. Well, let's check out what they had to say about their little experience here on the Wilder Ride. Take it away, Tim and Jeff.
Hey, everybody, this is Tim Andrews and
Jeff Leboff
from the Radio Labyrinth podcast, and we were very pleased to be on this podcast.
The Wilder Ride.
Yes, I know the name of the show, Jeff, and it's about Gene Wilder, and we each, how many minutes did we do?
We did 5 minutes.
Yeah, I did 3, and you did all 5.
All 5, right.
From the movie Young Frankenstein. Did you learn anything new about the movie, Jeff?
I don't think I learned anything new, but it was nice to just do a deep dive into the entire film, and then especially our segments.
Yeah, what was your favorite in-movie Joker gag?
I think I like a lot of the Groucho Marx references and stuff that Marty Feldman was doing.
Marty Feldman's my favorite part of the whole movie.
Yeah, he's hilarious.
And Terry Garr, who's lovely and funny. Favorite minute of the movie?
Some of our minutes are probably the favorites of mine during that movie.
Right.
Like the introductions and we got some good minutes out of the entire movie, I think, for our segment.
Do you feel differently about Young Frankenstein?
I don't know if I feel differently about it, but it's definitely, there's a lot more that I know about it now as far as the stuff that was in the script that didn't get filmed or stuff that maybe got edited out.
Right.
They do a lot of talking about that, which is very interesting to know stuff that they had written in the script but didn't actually make it into the film.
It wouldn't be possible for me to like it less. I love it even more now. It's a great movie, and you're right. You do learn an awful lot of new stuff.
Right,
and
I'm looking forward to their next movie, whatever they're going to do. They haven't announced yet, but our episodes are airing July 23rd through the 27th.
Oh, wow.
So we should probably plug that on our podcast next week.
We will do that.
Yeah, and we definitely want to thank those guys for having us on.
And the final minute will air on August 20th. That's the anniversary of the death of Gene Wilder.
Close to it. But.
Yeah. Well, okay. It's 9 days later than that, but it's around there. And, it'll be a year now, right? Or will it be 2 years? Gene Wilder, just going back into our childhoods, and especially more for you because you've met him and you're definitely a much bigger fan.
You had a chance to meet him, but
I know we don't know. They don't care. These people don't care. But loved him, loved everything about him, and even the movies that he like the
his since we had those guys on, I watched that movie Rhinoceros.
Yeah,
it was terrible, but
right.
It's so good just to watch anything with him in it.
Right, and Bonnie and Clyde and everything. So,
right.
No, it's great, and make sure you guys listen to every episode of the Wilder Ride.
Getting wilder by the minute.
Yeah.
All right, so once again, let's get things very, very straight. Tim was on 2 episodes.
Yes.
It was on minutes number 86 and 87. For some reason, the note that I gave him that said these are about 30 or 35 minutes each went in one ear, out the other. Halfway through the first one, I said, this is going to be about 4 hours. And he was like, what? So we kept him for 2, and we kept Jeff for all 5. And Jeff was actually really, really, really nice to be able to stay on for all 5 of our episodes. And we, again, poking a little fun, but Jeff and Tim were fantastic, I think. And Jeff gave us the theory we were missing.
I think Jeff tied the whole movie together for me. The idea that there were multiple time zones within Transylvania, and there may have been more than 24 within Transylvania, all of a sudden everything made sense.
And that the time zones didn't have to follow chronologically. They could be just mixed up however. So if you didn't know something, if you crossed into the next time zone, you could either be the keeper of that knowledge, or you could have had new knowledge bestowed upon you. And that's why it all works out.
And you could walk 10 feet and go 6 hours.
Right. So. Yeah, and the clocks didn't even have to work. The clocks could be on different times, whether you were outside or inside. Didn't matter.
Irrelevant.
So I give him 2 thumbs up for giving us the time zone theory.
Well, and that was a great addition to the show, but also I think for those 2 guys, and Jeff particularly, they kind of epitomize the most challenging listeners I think we have to the show. And those are the ones who, similar to us, have been lifelong fans of Gene Wilder. Because, like I said, Jeff's knowledge base, Tim's knowledge base of his work and of this movie really kept us on our toes and made us make sure that what we were doing was as close to correct as possible.
Right. And the fact that Tim said by the end of this he liked it even more, and that even though he sort of said it tongue-in-cheek that Jeff said, I didn't really learn anything, he did eventually say, there's a lot more that I now know about the movie, especially since we spent time diving into the script, talking about scenes that were dropped, things that were filmed and left on the cutting room floor, things that were edited and changed on the fly when they realized this doesn't work, or even stuff that was improv, which we realized there was very little improv. I think actually Madeline Kahn probably had most of the improv lines in the movie. It's amazing how much of it was actually written as intended.
Yeah, and even the stuff that was rumored to be improv was not.
Espresso.
So, yes.
Yeah, that was our Transylvanian, what do we call that? Transylvanian urban legend.
Yeah,
urban Transylvanian legend.
I mean, as long as I've been watching this movie, I've heard that was an improv line.
Well, those guys are radio guys, and we appreciate again that they had us on their podcast. And of course, Tim Andrews he was allowed. I say that with air quotes here for those folks who know Eric von Hessler. He was allowed to even mention it once on the von Hessler Doctrine. So
yeah, actually twice.
Did he do it twice?
I've heard them mention it one more time. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so that was great. And
I'm going to owe somebody a check.
It was kind of like, what is this now? And Tim tried to explain it, and
Eric
just kind of...
you've been talking for more than 30 seconds.
Yeah, we're moving on. So, but I'm not surprised to hear that Marty Feldman was both of their favorite characters.
Oh, loved it, especially the whole... And I love the fact that, again, being a little bit older, the Groucho Marx references, understanding who Marty Feldman was parodying with the scene when Elizabeth shows up. You take the blonde, I take the one in the turban.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, we have another pair of radio guys that joined us, guys that we know very, very well, the BK on the Air guy.
Yeah, two guys who really, Commander Clark, Mike Clark, I've been friends with for 20 plus years.
You can say decades.
Decades. I don't want to say
feel
decades. No. Many moons.
Many moons. And unfortunately, you may have seen a few of them.
Yeah. I possibly have. So
that weird sleepover that one time.
Yeah, well,
hey, everybody, why don't we take our pants off? Mike, put your pants back on. We're not playing that game here. There's only guys here.
And we're at work.
But I saw the bananas over in the other room. Mike, we'll explain what fruit bowl means later. Put your pants on. Unfortunately, Mike could not join us for a wrap-up, but BK was able to give us his thoughts.
Yeah, and BK, to me, is one of those people who has maybe the most broad knowledge of entertainment of anybody I know.
Well, you got to put a stick in the ground and say, okay, unless it's the Marvel or DC cinematic worlds, it's 70s and older.
This is true. This is true.
He pulls out like, oh, did you know that so-and-so was also the maid in such and such show and this and I think he lives on MeTV as a consultant.
I think he does. Well, I know he's constantly watching, every show that's on MeTV.
I'm pretty sure he's texting, tweeting, Instagramming, Facebooking, messaging,
IMDb,
harassing.
Yes.
He probably sends him his show. If you listen to my show, you'll understand where you've made your errors in your programming.
Well, and so between the two of them, we had the expert on that time frame. Mm-hmm. And then in Commander Clark, we had kind of the expert in horror movies and the monster genre.
Yeah.
And plus just two guys that are fun to be around and we have already a good chemistry with because you're on BK on the Air with them just about every Saturday and I get the opportunity to sit in fairly frequently as well.
We have to thank BK for the fact that the reason you and I have a show together is the very first time I had to sub in for BK, Commander Clark goes, oh, well, I won't be here either. And you and I ended up having to do the show.
That's right.
And I was like, well, I kind of know Walt from the one time he came in and he kind of knows me from the one time. But okay.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh, an opportunity to go talk into a microphone for 2 hours. Awesome.
And next thing I know, I told my wife, I was like, I had such a blast.
Yeah.
And I said, I think we really hit it off. And who knew, a year and a half or 2 years later, I'd be like, hey, Walt, I got an idea.
Well, when you sent me a text and said, hey, do you like Gene Wilder? I was like, what is he up to? He's got something cooking here.
Well, BK joined us along with Commander Clark for minutes 41 through 45. Some of the funniest early minutes when we started getting past when we really started diving into some of the rising action in the movie. And then they were back with us for 61 through 65. By that point, the movie was just off the rails. And some really, really good solid minutes. And like BK said, 10 minutes of a 106-minute movie. That means almost 10% of the movie we spent with the BK on the Air guys, which is great because we spent a lot of times with them anyway.
Yeah, that's right. And like I said, I had a lot of fun, really, with every guest. I mean, every guest brought something different to the table, but already having that on-air relationship with those guys, and then friendships otherwise, that really made those weeks just a blast to record.
Now, my favorite of those, if you go back, and I've used this as just listen to this one, and if you liked it, then you'll probably like all of them, was episode 44, How Many Licks Does It Take to Get to the Tootsie Roll Center of a Tootsie Pop?
That is funny you said that, because we've not talked about this off the air. I have actually recommended episode 44 to about 3 of my friends. And
if you like this minute, you'll probably like the whole podcast. Some of them might be a little drier, depending on the guest. Some might be even more wacky. But that sets the bar.
Yeah, it really does. It does.
Well, without further ado, why don't we go ahead and find out what BK has to say? I think he's going to focus a little bit more on Gene Wilder, the namesake of our podcast.
Makes sense.
Hey, it's BK on the air. I want to thank the guys at the Wilder Ride for having me on for not 1, but 2 separate weeks to allow me to share in celebrating Gene Wilder a total of 10 full minutes of Young Frankenstein, 1 minute at a time. Gene Wilder was a smart, industrious, extremely talented, and often very funny actor, plus a writer and a director. His sharp face with intense blue eyes and wilder hair became more cartoon-like as he got older, and he eventually could be seen alongside Richard Pryor in comedy films like Silver Streak, Stir Crazy, and See No Evil, Hear No Evil. They were kind of a dynamic comedy duo, which never failed to make me wet my pants laughing. When examining the career of an actor, there are certain things to look for, and one of the most important things is whether or not the actor is making choices about their work. Now, Gene appeared to be doing this. There are plenty of actors who get through a scene just fine and who deliver their lines nicely and competently and who never ever connect beyond that because it doesn't feel like they're bringing anything to the process aside from their physical presence to the picture, Gene Wilder was not one of the latter. He was selective about his work and he made less than 25 theatrical films plus sporadic television appearances. He seemed to choose experiences based on who he would be working with, and he loved and respected people like Gilda Radner, Richard Pryor, and Mel Brooks, people he shared a comic sensibility with and was willing to jump in and try things with them just for the fun of trying things. We don't always celebrate someone's place in pop culture in the right way while they're alive, but I think Gene Wilder got to see just how deeply his work had gotten through to several generations of audiences, and his own protectiveness towards the children especially, who loved him as Willy Wonka, suggests that he understood how deep that affection was. His performance in Young Frankenstein was near perfect, always entertaining and funny without insulting or making crude fun of the original Frankenstein mythos. You see, more good choices about his work. Now, I want to close with a Wilder quote. "I write funny. If I can make my wife laugh, I know I'm on the right track," unquote. Now, that's fantastic marital advice for any couple. For the Wilder Ride, this is BK on the air. Blooker!
Well, as always, we can rely on BK to bring us his perspective and to not really follow directions because we very specifically said, tell us what you liked and didn't like. And he goes, I'm going to talk about Gene Wilder.
Well, and I think, this would be my guess, if we had him in here and we tried to hold his feet to the fire about what his favorite moments were, we would have an hour and a half long end-to-end discussion on everything in the movie because he has told me over and over again how much he loves this movie.
I think, if you were to try to pin him down, maybe that's why he did it the way he did. I think if you were to pin him down, he'd say, well, my favorite part starts when the coffin opens and ends when it says the end.
Right.
Like, that's my favorite part.
Yeah, even the shot of the castle at the end would be one of his favorites, which it is one of mine as well. But we definitely, BK and Commander Clark, those guys, again, their knowledge, their background, the gravitas they bring with the sense of just the history, because they live this. I swear, these guys watch old reruns all the time. Yeah,
and then they dig into the old movies all the time. And then Commander Clark around October, from the 1st through the 31st, I mean, he's in horror movie marathon mode to kind of recap all the horror movies he wants to rewatch.
Yeah, and one of the things that has endured out of the podcast that we've brought up in text conversations and on air and everywhere else is hashtag BK ruins everything.
Hashtag BK ruins everything.
That has endured.
You know why, though? He was so excited about being on the podcast and talking about this movie.
He couldn't wait.
It was hard to contain him. He wanted to jump ahead and he wanted to bring up stuff that wasn't even going to be in the 5 minutes we had allotted to him.
He was all over the place.
Yeah, which was fine. I mean, part of that excitement was fun to watch. It was fun and it was fun to call him out on it. And the fact that you came, and it was your joke, the hashtag BK spoils everything.
Yeah,
that's all
I'll
you.
take credit for that.
So, I mean, I came up with, let's talk about law enforcement and issues with law enforcement.
Oh, that's right.
And the
That's
lollipop was all, well, he came up with how many licks, but I took it to the extreme.
That's right. The one time you did that.
Oh yeah, I was always a good boy.
Right.
So, well, that was very cool to have BK on. I wish we could have gotten Commander Clark. Everyone's got busy lives. That was one of those duos that we loved having them, and those are minutes worth going back and revisiting. If you just need a laugh, you just need to kind of escape. Any of those minutes with BK on the air and Commander Clark are really solid minutes.
Yeah, they're great. And really great humor throughout.
You know, someone who gave us some really good insights, some wry humor, very, very intellectual humor, and walked that fine line of being both intellectual but funny, not goofy. I don't think Sean German ever went goofy, but he walked that line of kind of being able to laugh and come up with something humorous and find what we were saying humorous and laugh with us, and then would say something serious, but not to the point where it felt like it was a lecture. At least, well,
except
not
for the
last
lecture.
Episode.
Well, once the lecture came, then it was a lecture, but it was a good lecture.
Here's what's so funny, because I'm a fan of Indiana Jones Minute. And the funniest thing is he worked out the notes of his monologue on immortality on the episodes that aired about a week before he came on our show. So it's almost like he had worked out what he wanted to say about immortality because they were chasing the Holy Grail in the Last Crusade. So when he came on our show, Walt, you and I think at one point had both feet up, mics turned off, headphones on, just sitting back listening. And I think the monologue initially before edit was a little over 11 minutes long. We just let our guest go. Because that's how we roll here.
And as ADD as I am, I still listen to everything that he had to say. That was a fantastic monologue, and I really appreciate the things that he said. Some of them were things that you and I had talked about. Some of those were things that I had never touched my gray matter. So
he synthesized the idea and the kinds of immortality in a way that it was sort of like those lectures you can download. I truly found myself just fascinated to hear him talk. And so even though paring it down to about 9 or so minutes, it was hard to do because I didn't want to cut any of it. But I realized at one point he kind of circled back twice on the same thing. So I was like, okay, we don't need to. But it was just so good. And the fact that we were able to kind of poke a little fun at the fact that he monologued and he liked it, that just goes to show you the kind of guy that Sean German.
Well, and it shows how smart we are for having someone like that on our show.
That was it. We were so smart. We picked the guy that has a podcast, 5 Minutes of Mime.
Right.
Ready? Here we go. And begin. Within 10 seconds. Hold on. It's 5 minutes. We got to hold 5 minutes of mime. No, it's truly not that. Although he does have dead air in his 5 minutes of mime, which is funny. If you've ever listened to his episodes, but they are very funny. They're only 5 minutes, and there's about a minute and a half of dead air in the middle while the mime does his thing. It's a very funny concept. But he did Spinal Tap Minute, and he's wrapping up as we're wrapping up the Groundhog Minute.
That's right.
So
yeah, and he's been one of the real strong guys in this movie by minute world, and one of the real go-tos, and
very active on lots of movies by minutes pages. A lot of the podcasts, not just as a guest, but also on their Facebook pages, and being just one of those supportive kind of guys. He's the guy you want in your corner. So if you're listening to this right now and you're inspired to do one of these, get Sean German, put him on your list. You need to have him as a guest.
And he's also a guy that you can go to and send a note and say, hey, we've got a question about whatever, and he'll do his best to either help you or get you to the right person.
Well, let's go ahead and find out. What did Sean have to say about this movie, Young Frankenstein?
Congratulations, Alan and Walt. You did it. You made it to the end of the first and the best of the 20-something Gene Wilder movies. This is Sean from Groundhog Minute and 5 Minutes of Mime. You might remember me from Young Frankenstein, minutes 26 through 30, minute 76, and the dissertation of minute 77. If you recall any of those minutes, you know I love this movie, but I love it even more now after hearing Alan and Walt talk about it these many months. While I knew it was a great comedy and a great monster movie, I learned so much about the care and attention to detail that went into making Young Frankenstein. I have new appreciation for how well the movie was made. The sets and costumes, lighting and editing, things I hadn't really considered before. And I never thought about the psychological implications of how Elizabeth, Frederick's fiancée, finishes the movie with the monster, Frederick's ersatz son. Just goes to show, no matter how many times you've seen a great movie like Young Frankenstein, there's always something new to discover. But my favorite part is the demonstration for the TNS. That's the Transylvania Neurological Society. I love Frederick's journey and watching him gain appreciation for his grandfather's work, but nothing beats a great gag. and the monster in tails and top hat dancing to Puttin' on the Ritz is the greatest. Some folks have wondered how this movies by minutes format works for comedies, if these movies lose something when examined in such detail. But as we look back at this movie, and all the other wonderful entertainment Gene Wilder left for us to watch and enjoy over and over again, I'm more in love with Young Frankenstein than ever before. I know Alan and Walt want me to keep this short, and they know how hard it is for me to be brief when it comes to this movie, so I have just one parting thought to share. I was recently watching James Whale's 1931 Frankenstein, and I could not stop myself from laughing. Seeing the bits of that serious movie and knowing what great comedy they would become at the hands of Misters Wilder and Brooks, it was as if the talents of those artists were reaching back through the decades to enrich both the original film and the satire. Thank you, Gene and Mel, and thank you, Alan and Walt, for bringing us along on this fantastic journey. And we'll see you next time on The Wilder Ride.
Wow. See, you get an intellectual who's also serious, who takes it seriously, but also learns something from it, and just feel like I got to go, buy some sanitary napkins or something. I got to go change my panties.
Mr. Sensitivity.
I am just feeling it. I'm suddenly thinking Elizabeth's a virgin. No.
Let's not go that far. Good grief.
No.
Yeah, and we definitely want to fight that battle again, don't we?
No, that was really, really cool. I love the fact that Sean appreciated more of the technical, some of the stuff that we brought up with the lighting and framing and just the writing and some of the stuff that you sort of, in the back of your mind is all there, but if you're just a movie watcher, you tend to just watch the movie.
Right.
And when you slow it down and you do pay attention to some of those elements, and that's kind of nice to know that they appreciated some of the technical elements we talked about.
I also found it interesting, too, that he, sees the 1931 Frankenstein and the similarities between these two movies, and really has that same appreciation that we had for the tie-in to the original Frankenstein stories.
Absolutely. The fact that he can see the joke that's going to be coming later while watching the original 1931. Now, I guess that would be the hard part for me to go back now and watch any of the classic Frankensteins, is to realize, oh, that was in Young Frankenstein. Yep. And it's like, it's the reverse. I mean, they came first,
Yeah, and I watched the original 31 sometime in the midst of our production of this, and I did catch several of those things.
I had no idea how short that movie was.
Yeah,
it's only 70 minutes.
Yeah, it's real short.
I had no idea. I'm thinking this is this old classic black and white. I had no idea it was such a short movie. And the impact
for the time, it's fairly fast paced. There isn't a whole lot of Frankenstein slowly walking down the street in the shadows. It does kind of move along.
It wasn't like some of the scenes of Naughty Marietta we cut to when we had Pete Mummert with us, and it was like, oh my God, this is horrible.
What was that other movie that we referenced early on that one of the Gravediggers was in?
That was...
The week Sully was here. I keep meaning to send him a text and ask him if he ever watched that crazy movie.
Linda Lovelace for president.
Linda Lovelace for president. That's right.
See, I had to backdoor it into it. I had to okay. Oh yeah, Linda Lovelace.
Of course.
Linda Lovelace for president. Oh wow. Well, Sean was such funny. A guy with the last name German. He had no idea what was going on in the German culture, but that was great.
Not a clue.
That was awesome. We did have our German translator. We probably should do a shout out to him right now.
Yeah,
that's kind of cool.
He was great.
He was fantastic. Always in the Oompa Hall, the Biergarten, always ready to give us his analysis. Even when he didn't quite get things exactly right about what's in the movie, he at least told us when the actors were doing the German correctly or some of the German words they should have used or should have considered. And that was a great element to add.
Yeah, even the signs on the train.
Right. And the grammar error in the train. Yeah.
That's right.
So shout out to Malte Dirks in Germany. I almost want to pick a movie that has German in it just to have him come back.
I was just thinking the same thing, and even if we get one that has not one word of German and not any German influence, we're still going to have to figure out a way to get him.
We'll just bring him. We're going to call him and say, just be our Swedish counterpart. Just do it. Nobody knows anything.
Yeah, there you go. Be a train expert, or
you have an accent.
Whatever it is. Whatever it is that we
do it like
doing.
Schwarzenegger. He could come on and
he would love it. He would love
it. We had remember in the what's her face's Heidi Helga. Heidi Helga's dad was sort of like the drunk uncle of Schwarzenegger. Remember how he
That's
talked?
Right. Yeah.
But with all this monster business, the goggles, they do not work. Get to the chopper.
Yeah, there were a couple of weaker moments. Yes.
No, those were the 2 minutes you and I decided to do on our own.
That's right.
We were like, you know what? We've got Doug Greenberg, who wanted the whole blind man, which was going to go over a weekend.
That's right.
And we had just those 2 minutes. We're like, well, can we get somebody for the... And I said, you know what? It's the little girl. You know what? We haven't had a solo minute since we opened the frickin' credits, which is boring.
That's right.
So why don't we take it? And I had a blast. We came up
those
with...
are
You,
great.
I think, came up with Flingingstein Airlines.
That's right. That's right.
I'm over here doing like the bad Uncle Schwarzenegger voice. You're doing Flingingstein Airlines, and there was some fun minutes.
Those were good minutes. So,
well, you know what were really good minutes as well? I mean, they were all good for their own different reasons. And I think one of the coolest things about this podcast was meeting so many guests that wanted to be part of this, that wanted to be part of our Wilder Ride, the inaugural season, that had a love of the movie in some cases, or had never seen it but still wanted to be part of it. But a guy who I have been listening to now, catching up on 3 full seasons of their podcast, the guy Tom Taylor of the Indiana Jones Minute, the first of all 3 of the Indiana Jones guys that joined us on our podcast.
And he had some great minutes. And
minutes 46 through 50, right? During the animation where we were talking about that's real electricity arcing off of a dummy of Peter Boyle, talking about the potted meat glasses and goggles.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, the Spam can goggles or whatever they were.
We introduced Tom to the idea of potted meat. It's like pre-chewed meat.
Welcome
nice
to the
soft.
South, my friend. Half digested and horrible.
Well, the
for
fact
you.
that we got the trifecta, and I didn't think we were going to do it because we did finally get Jerry Porter at the very last week, the minute 101 of 106 minutes, but minute 101, and he had never seen the movie and was getting ready to go on tour and said he was going to sit down, watch it, and discuss it, and I think we had a great time with him. We had Pete Mummert towards the back half of the season, but Tom was pretty much right in the middle and really some solid minutes, and Tom filed this with us.
Hi, this is Tom Taylor from the Indiana Jones Minute and the Movie Hole and ABC Devo, and I was your guest during minutes 46 to 50 of the Young Frankenstein. I had a great time on the show. Congratulations to you guys for doing an awesome job. My minutes were all about the laboratory scene, trying to give his creation life and everything, and he failed the first time, and it was reminding me a lot of Mel Brooks in The Muppet Movie. And you guys did a beautiful job of incorporating little bits of Mel Brooks' scene from the Muppet Movie in our minutes. And it made me think later on, how in the world has Gene Wilder never been in a Muppet movie? I mean, I know now why he's not, because he's passed away. But how did we go through the 70s and 80s without Gene Wilder being in a Muppet movie? Or I don't think he's even on the Muppet Show ever. That seems like a missed opportunity. I mean, even Richard Pryor, his times buddy in movies, sold balloons to Gonzo in the Muppet Movie, and maybe one of the funniest moments of the movie. So you can only imagine what Gene Wilder would have done with similar material, but I guess it wasn't meant to be, but it makes sense enough in my head canon that I think I can picture it. So take a break, a well-deserved rest, and then come back with your next movie, whatever it'll be. It's going to be awesome. And until then, please try to finish this season with quiet dignity and grace. I'm not going to freak out because I'm not as good at that as Gene Wilder.
Well, there you go. Somebody who enjoyed the fact that he mentions the Muppet Movie. He mentions the fact that Mel Brooks recreates this German sort of torture scene with electricity and hats and everything, and Miss Piggy ends up turning the tables on him. And I decided, hey, well, you know what? The guest brought it up. Go grab the clip. And so, which has been something I've been doing throughout the whole thing. Sometimes it's not just clips from the movie. Sometimes it's clips from pop culture or something you said or I said or something the guest said. I'm like, oh, you know what? If I could just find that little mental goose to keep you thinking like, oh, okay, there's something else here besides just the 3 guys or 2 people talking.
Well, some of them have caught me off guard. And, when I listen, I'll either, be working out or driving back and forth to work or whatever. And there have been a couple of them that you've inserted that have just killed me. So, and that Muppet one, I've always been a fan of the Muppet Show. So that was a perfect drop.
That's funny that Tom said that they hadn't used Gene Wilder in any of the Muppet movies or even the Muppet Show.
That is really hard to believe.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it is really hard to believe. And when you think of the talent that went through the Muppet Show back during the 70s, it's hard to believe that he never made an appearance. So, and I watched every week, and I don't ever remember him being on there. I guess we could go back and do a deep dive, but I don't remember.
Yeah, I'm waiting for somebody to go, dummies, season 2.5 of whatever. You know what? Shut up.
Please,
Tom
BK.
Taylor, first of all, Tom Taylor said no, and I trust Tom Taylor.
I do too.
So, I mean, he's one of the guys of the Indiana Jones Minute. How do you go wrong with that?
Yeah, unassailable.
Hey, totally as far as podcasts go, and there's so many of them I'm catching up with, but they were the ones I started to listen to right after the Thing Minute when that got me pulled in. Those guys set such a high benchmark. Every day I think to myself, are we even close? I mean, like, that's how good their show is. So if you're listening, check out the Indiana Jones Minute. Those guys, it's not just that there's a lot of great podcasts that do the deep dive and they do the analysis, but there's something about just the personality of those three guys. It's just funny to listen to.
Yeah, I've just started listening to theirs, and
it's
worth the time.
Really good.
It is.
And again, this is not a knock on anybody else. Everybody's got their own style, and maybe you don't like that style. Maybe you want it to be more serious. But if you want just go off the first of all, if you like this,
I was going to say
were just on,
you would have already jettisoned this,
right? If you're still with us, then you'll love the Indiana Jones Minute because they go off the rails sometimes. They go down rabbit trails, and I think honestly, that's the kind of podcast I wanted this to be, where we still left the listener with something about the movie, something they may not have known, something behind the scenes, but maybe also learning a little bit about us.
Well, of course, the audience could be out there going, "You guys meant this to be funny? This is not funny." I don't know what you think it is, but this is not funny.
Yeah, I cried a lot. I suddenly I upped my prescription for Zoloft or something. What is it? Vitamin Z. What is it? What do you take for like depression?
Rum. If you're asking me what I take,
I'm double taking Effexor and popping some vitamin Z.
Well, I also like that Tom mentioned the quiet dignity and grace line.
Oh, yeah, to end it. I was waiting for him to go bananas.
Yes.
And then he didn't. And then he goes, I can't do Gene Wilder.
Yeah. Nobody can do Gene Wilder. But that quiet dignity and grace line was one of the great lines of this movie.
That was one of those ones where it's overused now, but at the time, the idea that you think he's walking away, the intellectual, the experiment failed, they're all trying to pick him up and say, no, it's okay. It's okay. And then he turns around to the dead body. You son of a bitch! I'm going to kill you! I'm going to kill you! And they're trying to take
strangling the dead body.
And Inga's trying to save the monster who's apparently still dead from being strangled. I loved it. So great.
And that is one of the fourth wall breaks, too, where Marty Feldman turns around and goes, quiet dignity and grace.
Yeah, he does look directly at us like, yeah.
Well, and it's interesting going from Tom now to Doug, because you have kind of the quiet dignity and grace of Tom to the Philadelphia street of Doug.
Doug from the Rocky Minute.
Yeah, which is another great minute podcast.
And I think we're lined up. I don't know if he wants us as pairs or individuals, but I know he is chomping at the bit to start Rocky 2, and we are on that list.
Yeah, one of my favorite in the Rocky series.
What kind of kills me is apparently because we got into this later than some of these guys, he's like, well, what scenes would you like if you wanted to do a scene? And I mentioned 5, and he said, oh, those were already taken. I'm like, what the? Wow! Are you asking me what scene I want if I can't pick the ones I want?
What's left?
Exactly. Why don't you tell me what's left?
The credits.
We've got opening credits, and we've got closing credits.
And the scene with the ambulance driving.
We got the one scene where he sits there in the church for a minute and a half and says nothing. Oh, good.
Yippee-ki-yay.
They already did that one.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's another one.
Die Hard. But yeah, no, Doug Greenberg was fantastic. He is actually the only guest we did this for. Every guest was contained within that week, either a shortened version of that week, and we had multiple guests, or had the whole week. We never had the weekend sleepover except for Doug Greenberg.
That's right.
And we're still having to pay Naughty Marietta's keepers because he wouldn't tip.
Yeah, that's right. That was the Naughty Marietta week, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Naughty Marietta. There we are. But anyways, so let's check out what Doug Greenberg of the Rocky Minute had to say about the Wilder ride.
Hello, everyone. This is Doug from Rocky Minute. I was lucky enough to join the gentleman from the Wilder ride for minutes 68 through 72, the blind hermit in the woods scene with Frankenstein's monster. Have I learned something new about the movie? Pretty much every day I listened, you guys had some behind-the-scenes notes or production stuff that shocked me, or that was new that I learned. And, I mean, I was honored to be part of it. And, I can't thank you guys enough once again. I requested the scene with the monster and Gene Hackman in the woods because it is my favorite scene of the movie. But really, you could have given me any scene and I would have loved it. Anything with Igor, I didn't get. I mean, I got a little snippet of Gene Wilder at the end of minute 72, which was my last minute with you guys. But, he's he acts that part of Frederick Frankenstein so brilliantly, and Igor and Marty Feldman and Gene Hackman, they play off each other so well in this movie. It's like they're a comedy duo that should be on the road together because it was so wonderful and funny the way they played off each other. Again, like I said, the scene that I requested and the scene that I covered with you guys is my favorite scene because it's just the comedy just keeps going. I said it in the minutes. It's like your classic nothing can go right scene. Where the monster just wants some food, he wants something to drink, and even like a simple pleasure like a cigar, and none of it goes right. It's just the buildup is hilarious to the thumb being on fire. I still laugh every time I even think about it. It's insane. It's insane. I've come to appreciate, I always did appreciate it as a comedy, Young Frankenstein, but since listening to you guys cover it minute by minute, I've come to appreciate it on a different level, I would say, because of like the jokes, on the surface, I'm watching it as a fan. It makes me laugh because I'm watching something funny. But you guys talk about the comedic timing and the setups and delivery and the ways that they could have gone wrong or could have went too over the top and make it not funny. Another thing that I just thought of that I got a new appreciation for, that I always loved how after when they were doing a charade scene and and after the monster stops choking him, he goes, "Set a give!" And to find out that was like an improv line by Gene Wilder made that so much more funny and perfect to me. I love the set a give line. Speaking of Gene Wilder, I haven't seen a whole lot by him. I've seen a couple of his pair-ups with Richard Pryor, of course, Willy Wonka and Blazing Saddles. I just think he's a great actor. I didn't hear too much about him as a person, but he every role he does, he nails it. He nails it. He's not a one-trick pony. Nobody ever can accuse him of that. He's got such range, and his serious roles, his comedic roles, like he does it all, and he does it all convincingly. So I know his the anniversary of his death is coming up, and I just wanted to say that, like, as a fan of Young Frankenstein and some of his other roles, like I think he's a brilliant actor, and it was a great loss. He retired long before he passed away, but he's his acting is missed throughout movie land, and they don't make actors and characters like Gene Wilder anymore. So hats off to you, Gene. All right, that's all I have to say. So again, Alan and Walt, thank you so much for having me on and letting me be part of this journey. And I'll talk to you soon. So long.
The cool thing here about what Doug just said, and one of the things he said early on, was he listens to the podcast every single day. That he was one of our loyal listeners from day one. And to have somebody who loves a movie, like knew the scene he wanted, knows the movie, laughs at the jokes, has seen it over and over, and to say, I learn something new every day, that's like...
Yeah, that says a lot.
That's like payment for doing this. It's like, I feel good.
Yeah.
There's two audiences that I feel like this is all worth it. There's that audience, the people who love it and still have learned something every single day, like Mike Clark even has said to us from BK on the Air. And then the people like your friend who's going through some serious treatments that need the laugh every day.
Yes. And that is so meaningful to me when I hear people say, hey, I had something going on, or, this really was great timing, or this really made my week to be able to laugh at this. That makes all this worth it.
And then, I don't know about you, but the people who know us that are still catching up to get the occasional text or the occasional message saying, just listen to the intro of episode whatever, funniest intro yet, or, oh my God, I can't believe you did that, or I feel the same way. It's those little moments where you realize you've connected with somebody who's just listening to it on their own time.
Yes. Yeah. And it is, and we've talked about this. We really have had a great time doing this season. But to have that extra input and to see the people on Facebook too, on our listeners group, and the kind of the constant flow of stuff. And, one of the guys even went out after we had that episode talking about the monster bookstore and shot pictures.
Robert Black.
Robert went down and
Robert E.G. Black.
Robert E.G. Black goes down and takes pictures of the monster bookstore and the
Shoe Palace.
The Shoe Palace, yeah. And I was blown away that somebody would do that. That was just awesome.
We said that in the show. If any of our West Coast listeners, anybody in the Santa Monica area, if they just happen to want to drive by, like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, within a couple of days, all of a sudden, on our Facebook page, he's sharing it. I'm like, oh my God, that is the coolest thing in the world.
I think it was the day that show dropped.
That was so awesome.
Yeah.
And now we're involved with a project that he's decided to start.
That's right.
Yeah, the fool decided to do his own podcast.
Yes.
So who's more foolish, the fool or the fools who follow him?
Well, the fool who watched the movie that we're going to be doing, I think, is the real fool here.
Well, we were talking to Doug, who just gave us his thoughts of the movie. I do like the fact that he said that Gene and Marty Feldman play off each other so well. A comment you and I have made multiple times. A lot of these actors in this movie have background in stage, a background in improv, and so much of that worked so well in this movie. And we found places in the script where it was exactly like it needed to be, but maybe just a little tweaked, and some places where they went off script. But the fact is, their banter, their reactions, their timing was fantastic. Not just Marty and Gene, which were great because master and servant relationship, but I think all of them. Elizabeth improv'd at places, and she was fantastic. Terry Garr was such a genuine, showed her range. I mean, her career launched after this movie.
Oh, this made her. And one of the episodes I was listening to this week, we were talking somewhat about her career after this movie, and going from really just being eye candy,
right,
and the stuff she had done
just
before,
a background dancer and an eye candy,
yeah, to being one of the premier actresses in Hollywood, where she did Close Encounters and some of those other movies,
all the way through to being recognized at least with a nomination for a Best Supporting Actress award for Tootsie.
That's right, and she is such a strong actress and has so much depth. You can't help but watch this movie and see the incredible talent that was on screen here. And to think that every single role that got cast, they cast with someone who was amazing.
Right. It was really good. And of course, Cloris Leachman, we didn't talk about her in this, but in terms of improv and just the scenes between her and Gene when she's taking him up the stairs, putting him in the room, the Ovaltine scene. I mean, just
carrying the candle that's not lit.
Not lit. Well, lit 1 minute and then not lit the next, but...
Right, it was a small error.
But a little continuity error. So, but Doug was great to have, and we had him the entire time with Gene Hackman, who at the time, we remember going back, didn't want his name in the credits. So the initial audiences had no idea Gene Hackman was in that movie.
And probably at that time, by far, the most well-known actor in the movie.
Yeah.
And he says, I don't want the credit. The movie is what's important.
Right. And did a great job playing a little comedic role.
He really did. He really did. And that was a tough one. We talked kind of in depth about that. Mm-hmm. Playing a blind person, it has to be just an incredible challenge.
And we debunked the myth. We talked about it already earlier in this episode. But yeah, that line about, but I was going to make espresso. That was in the script, that it was not an improv line. Now, what we did find is it was so funny the way he delivered it, they couldn't do anything else because there was a lot he was supposed to do after delivering that line, but they just cut everything. It's like, it was cut.
Yeah.
We're done.
Well, it's the infamous handkerchiefs in the mouth that the whole crew had to have because everybody kept busting up laughing.
It's a great story Mel Brooks has about buying, I think, $1,000 worth of handkerchiefs just to stuff in your mouth.
Imagine putting that on the budget line.
It's a story, actually, maybe I'll insert it, because there's a story he tells at the 40th anniversary showing at the Academy Theater, and he tells about how he needed to send one of his PAs to the local men's store and say, can I get $1,000 worth of handkerchiefs?
Not only Gene laughed, but the crew would laugh a lot. I went out and I said, get $1,000 to my assistant director. I said, get $1,000 and go out and take the money and buy white handkerchiefs with the $1,000. He said, say that again. So I told him, get 1,000 from somebody, from Fox. Go out and buy the white I'm sorry, Jim Giannopoulos is here now. Get the money from Fox. Buy the white. He came back with 10,000 white handkerchiefs. I gave everybody in the cast, everybody in the crew, not in the cast, because in the cast
I didn't get one.
No,
I didn't get one either.
Cast never got a white handkerchief. But there were like 30 people, 40 people in the crew. Every one of them got a white handkerchief. More than one white handkerchief. And then in the scene, I mean, there'd be some scenes where one of the scenes was stay close to the candles, the staircase, and she took a fucking hour. Stay close to the candles, the staircase can be treacherous. And then the can be treacherous, the crew went. But I turned around because we got the white, and it was a sea of white handkerchiefs. I said, I got a hit here. I knew it, And it was a great idea on my part because the crew kept breaking up and laughing at everything we did.
That's crazy.
Well, we've got coming up now a guy that we brought in later in the movie, and we enjoyed having him on for the couple of minutes he was on with us with minutes 84 and 85. And we said, you know what? We need somebody to help us close out the last 2 minutes, and we brought him back. And that's Dave D'Alessandro of the Seinfeld Minute.
Yeah, and Dave's great. And I want to put in a quick plug and somewhat a plug for me. Dave asked me to join him and his co-host on the Seinfeld Minute for one of their minutes. And he recently sent me the minute that we're going to be doing, and it is one of my favorite minutes of the show. It's got all of the major characters in it, and I am chomping at the bit to do that. If you are like me and you love Seinfeld, that is a great podcast to listen to. Dave is really insightful. You've heard him on here that he gave some great insight into the minutes he was on, and that is a fun podcast.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to hearing you on it. I know you are a huge Seinfeld fan.
Huge.
We had one of our episodes where I think for about 10 minutes, I finally said, well, why don't you just go ahead and cut the last 10 minutes of what we just recorded and make that your next minute, because we just got done talking about Seinfeld.
Yeah, I could go all night on Seinfeld, and so I'm really looking forward to that. And if you are a Seinfeld fan, that's a great one to plug into.
Well, let's see what Dave has to say about his time with us here during Young Frankenstein and The Wilder Ride.
Hi, this is Dave from Seinfeld Minute. Final thoughts on Gene Wilder. Well, certainly a supremely talented actor. He has this sort of, I don't know how quite to describe it, but he has a way of acting where he almost overly hams it up on purpose, just to show you his range, if that makes any sense, where he'll say things like, oh, I forget which movie it was an early one of his where he's like, I'm in pain. I'm in pain now, where he acts in a way where it's, again, very over the top and hammy, but also, on purpose, in the sort of way that bad actors do, almost like he's doing a parody of himself. It's not an easy thing to do and have it come off like good acting as opposed to just a bad actor. So he was quite talented in that regard, where he can bring up a lot of emotion, but not do it in a very hammy way, or if he wanted to be hammy, he could be hammy. It seems like the more you examine someone's career in detail, the more you find out about them, and the more impressed you are with their body of work. I mean, it makes sense, but I never really thought about it before. Like, I never would have thought to have a Gene Wilder podcast and examine his movies in detail. But now that I'm a part of the show, I find it very enjoyable. It's very interesting to delve into someone's career and examine their movies and find these little flaws and things that you think you knew about them, but in fact you didn't really know much about them at all. The more you look, the more you find out about them, and the more enjoyable their movies are. Thanks.
Something he just said, Walt, which I hadn't thought about it in the terms that Dave just said, but you're right, or he's right. Gene Wilder can take over the top and hammy and somehow put just enough of that genuine, real, that sincerity behind it that you feel like, well, okay, that's just how he talks. That's okay. I don't have a problem. He's not Jim Carrey. Like, when I watch Jim Carrey do Jim Carrey, I'm like, okay, that's over the top.
He's just ridiculous.
When I watch Gene Wilder, I'm like, but that's just Gene Wilder.
Early on, Matt Gray mentioned that same thing, and I had jotted a quick note just because Matt being a millennial, I know that is something that millennials value as people being genuine. So to hear him and Dave both mention that, and that has always been one of the things that has made Gene so endearing to me, is just in whatever role he was in, you always felt like he was that character. You always empathized with him. And sometimes in Young Frankenstein, you don't want to empathize with him.
Well, the story sets itself up, which we talked about during the course of this season. Dr. Frankenstein's the bad guy. And there's really, in the story, nothing likable about him, nothing redeemable. And yet somehow Gene Wilder is able to walk that line. And even though it's a comedy, he still has a lot of flaws. He's still about him, the God complex, all the stuff we talked about all season long. But I've never hated him.
No. And I think that being that he is the writer, the primary writer of the movie, this was his idea all along. They probably didn't have anybody else in mind for Dr. Frankenstein, Frederick. So he...
Well, you'd be wrong then.
Perfect. So he really was able to own that role.
Yeah, but sometimes you get so much ego invested in you're the writer, you're the actor, you're the lead, you've got your best friend directing, you feel like you probably have input on the direction. You can get so lost in sort of the ego of owning it that you lose track of the character and the performance, and he never does.
Well, I think some of that is, as you've heard some of our guests and you've heard other people mention, and I hope this is true, because you hear things and then you find out the real story behind somebody, but there's never been anybody who's come out and said, what an arrogant jerk.
Right, no.
That guy was such a useless... You don't get that with Gene. Everybody has nothing but glowing things to say about him and what a genuinely nice guy he was. And even somebody had mentioned that they almost met him at some...
Tom Taylor.
Yeah,
Tom Taylor
that's right.
said...
And he's just kind of being a human
just
being,
a normal guy
in a restaurant.
I think it was actually during that minute you said, how big is the book that says all the things that were bad about Gene Wilder? Like a page? He left his trash out one day too long at the curb,
right,
or something. He's just a genuinely good guy.
You've never had that person come out and be like, he berated me and he smashed my windshield out with a hammer. Just never happened.
No problems, no issues, nothing in the tabloids, nothing at all.
Which makes it kind of fun. I mean, I think if we were doing the works of Gary Busey, there'd be a point where we're like, okay, this damn guy is a train wreck. We all know it, and I'm sick and tired of talking about it.
Oh, let's do Gary Busey and Richard Pryor together.
Oh, gosh. Oh, what a
Who
nightmare.
can out-coke the other during their heyday?
Oh, my gosh. But you just don't have that with Gene, and I think that is one of the reasons why you buy into his character so much in this movie, and he is very different in this movie than he is in Blazing Saddles. Blazing Saddles, in many ways, is more of a pure comedy, where this is an important story, a weighty story, and so you're in it with him from the beginning.
Right, and he manages to pull it off, and when it's heavy and weighty, you're in it, and you believe it.
Yeah.
And when it's silly and slapsticky, you're still in it, and you never lose it. And I know people get sick of us saying it, but that pendulum back and forth is, I think, the key to why we're still talking about this movie, because it does that balancing act so well.
Yeah, and I think all of us as humans struggle with identity issues in one way or another. And for him, you can relate to that. None of us were, had grandparents reanimating the dead and then going on a rampage through town. Well, most of us didn't.
No, I didn't have any Germans in my background either. Those wacky Germans.
You never know what they're doing next. So, but we can all kind of relate to, family issues, and we've talked about that before. So, yeah, we all kind of... Gene is such an endearing guy that you want to like his characters.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that carries through. And Dave obviously brings it up that he can do hammy and it's still real. He can do over the top, it's real. He can do just soft and genuine, it's real. Basically, no matter what, it's real. And that's cool.
And none of it's ever uncomfortable. You're never like, wow, that is just not him. He is a great comedian, and he is a great dramatic actor.
And I love the fact that he says, I may not know all the movies of Gene Wilder, and I never thought about creating we'll just do, instead of a franchise, let's do an actor and his career or her career and watch it evolve. So I think kind of cool that there's it tickled the minds of some people. They're like, oh, okay, well, what's this? This is sort of still a movie by minute, but it's, rather than a franchise, you were going to kind of go by the actor's career.
And there are certainly very few actors you'd really want to do that with.
True. That's a true statement. Yeah. I mean, okay, we'll play for a second. If you could pick off the top of your head just a handful of people that you think had at least enough of a body of solid work worth doing, because I know one off the top of my head.
Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks would be great.
And
Tom Hanks would be fantastic, actually.
Yeah, I think he is so strong. I think Arnold Schwarzenegger, because...
Arnold would be fun.
He would be awesome, because even
he would live every 80s trope movie that has ever existed. All the one-liners.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, no doubt. And he's just kind of a fun actor to watch work.
That would be good. What about Harrison Ford?
Harrison Ford would be another one. And you think about the diversity of stuff he's done.
Right.
From The Fugitive, which is still one of my favorite movies, to Star Wars, to Indiana Jones. I mean,
Witness is one of my all-time favorite movies of his.
Great. Yeah, I mean, we could go on and on all night.
What about on the female side? Do you have any of that pop? Because we've just come up with 3 males, so can we come up with 3 females? Because I know one right now, Jodie Foster.
I think Jodie Foster would be a fun one, and some of her dramatic roles are some of the most powerful.
She's
that have
great,
ever been put
but
on
then
film.
she can do comedy too because she did what was the movie with Mel Gibson about the gambler? Maverick. That was funny.
It was.
That's a great Western retelling, and then to have James Garner in it as a cameo from the TV series he was in called Maverick.
That's
and to
right.
Have the movie version.
And was that with his new liver or his old liver?
I don't know. I'm not sure which liver it was on. But so Jodie Foster would be a female for me.
You know, Madeline Kahn would be an interesting one to do that with, because she, just in the couple of movies she did with Gene Wilder, three movies? 2 or 3
I have to go back and look.
Her characters there are...
I mean, definitely 3 for a fact.
Yeah, and all 3 characters very different, but she brings a talent to the table that is really...
I could do
one
a
of the
Madeline
top.
Kahn.
Yeah, Madeline Kahn is great. And, you know, there are a lot of others.
You know
and
one
I'm
that I
trying
would
think.
love to do? Sigourney Weaver.
Wow, that would be a good one.
How cool is that? To go from Alien to the Ghostbusters to Aliens to even Holes and later, and even showing up in, although we wouldn't do necessarily the Netflix series, but she was one of the villains in one of the Daredevil series on Netflix. So
that's right.
Talk about an amazing career she's had.
Yeah, and every single role you ever see her in, she is completely convincing.
She's great.
So, yeah, she is. And there are, now that we're talking
about
it,
Mel
there's more and
Gibson,
more.
she was actually in a movie with Mel
That's
Gibson.
Right. That's right, she was.
Very early on, back in Vietnam or something. And they were talking about, like, he was like this really inspired sort of like a filmmaker or something. And he came up with this idea of writing a story about some kind of an assassination attempt. And turned out that there was actually going to be an assassination attempt.
That's right.
The Year of Living Dangerously.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
And they pulled him into because they thought, well, you must be a spy. And he's like, I just was coming up with this idea for a story.
Yeah.
And the story he was coming up with, because it was so real, it was actually going to happen. They thought he must be a spy. So that was definitely an early Mel Gibson and an early Sigourney Weaver movie.
Well, and she is one of those people, she's a very physical actor because she has some parts where she really has to work hard. I mean, there are some, especially in Alien, she really...
Alien and Aliens, the 2 movies back to back. I would argue Alien 3 still, and then Alien 4, The Abomination. And
yeah.
But
she would be one that you could really...
There's not enough of us.
No. No.
I'd love to do a Sigourney Weaver. Maybe we could do those as Patreons.
Maybe we could. Maybe we could get Sigourney Weaver in here. Our wives may have to chaperone.
True. True. I got a thing for Sigourney Weaver.
Yeah. Sigourney Weaver is something else.
I'm like, anybody who can look good and kick alien ass.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yep.
That's competition right there.
Well, and that kind of goes to one of my frustrations with people sometimes who don't take sci-fi seriously. The storylines in those Alien movies and some of the other movies that she's done are some of the best writing, with one glaring exception. But the Alien movies are great, but they would not be what they are without her. I mean, she...
To an extent, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
But also the extent of having such a strong female lead and making a female lead believable. But when you think about it, Alien was in 1979.
That's crazy.
You know, we're just 2 years off of Star Wars, and here we are, truckers in space. Everybody's like, oh, truckers in space. And you watch it like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's gothic horror in space. It's
Yeah.
fantastic. Well, we kind of fell off. Hey, wait, does that ever happen in any of our
No, this is
episodes?
a first. It took 106 episodes for us to get down a
to
rabbit
finally spin off the tracks. We've got one last person to hear from. It's another one of the guys from the Indiana Jones Minute, and it was such a pleasure to have Pete Mummert join us for minutes 91 through 95. He helped us get through the single toughest minute of the movie. The minute you and I were both, when we sat back and said, we don't have to worry about that for like 4 months. But we both recognized at some point, we got to deal in the contemporary 21st century, Me Too movement world, that the monster really kind of forcibly takes Elizabeth. And Pete Mummert was there with us. And thank God, because Pete is such an intellectual, such a good He's like the good guy. He's the genuine. He's like the Gene Wilder of the group.
He is, and that's still, those couple of minutes were still the toughest ones for me in this movie.
Yeah, it was 1 minute for her, and we didn't realize that technically at the very, 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 very end with Terry Garr, we were like, wait a minute,
we had another one.
Why are we redoing the scene?
Yeah,
so
thanks.
But he was with us for the first and the toughest one with Elizabeth.
Yeah, and that is a tough one, and it was interesting too that other people brought that scene up a couple of times. I think it wasn't Julie one of the people who maybe
Julia
mentioned
brought
it
it up.
earlier on.
Crystal Beth brought it up.
Yep.
A couple people want to know how we handled it. A couple of guests after we had already gotten done with it said, so how did you handle that scene? It's like, wait, we just got done. We don't want to go back.
Right. Yeah, and it was almost traumatic to deal with. So I really appreciated his joining us for those minutes.
In fact, I think it was David Smith of the Airplane Minute was right after we finished
That's
with
right.
Pete Mummer, and he comes on and he's like, so how did you handle that? I'm like, what you got?
Yeah.
And we had to explain how we did it. I still felt like I needed that shower, like that scene where you like burn your clothes and jump in the shower and cry for like an hour.
Yes. Yep.
So, well, let's hear from Pete. I know he's got a very short, but they say brevity is the soul of wit. And I think we are going to get a very nice thing here from Pete Mummert. Pete, take it away.
Hey, Alan and Walt, it's Pete Mummert from the Indiana Jones Minute. I was just sitting here brushing my hair and singing the Battle Hymn of the Republic and wanted to say congratulations on making it through Young Frankenstein. It's awesome. I had the pleasure of recording minutes 91 through 95 with you guys. And one thing that is really stuck in my head, and I keep thinking about it, I was completely blown away, Alan, when you mentioned that when Elizabeth says no tongues, Gene Wilder starts making sounds and not using his tongue to talk. That's one of the funniest things. And I'd never, ever caught that before. Anyway, just one of the great and hilarious things you guys have both brought up. And if IMDb's any guide, you only have 36 more Gene Wilder roles left to cover. So you guys are making some progress. Anyway, keep up the great work and looking forward to your next project.
Oh, that was kind of nice, bringing back the whole hair brushing and Battle Hymn of the Republic and part of the minute with Pete there. But I got to be honest, this is one of those moments where it's like he had never thought of why Gene Wilder muttered from the rest of the moments when Madeline Kahn said, no tongues.
You know what? I was in the same boat with him. I had never thought about that. And then you mentioned it, and I was like, oh, crap, that is right. That is exactly what was going on there. How did I miss this? So that was a great revelation.
And again, not in the script, and they both played it that way. I'm wondering how many stifled laughs were off camera when he started muttering and Madeline Kahn went with it. He went with it. I mean, the whole scene finishes with him crawling out on his knees.
Yes.
Well, he's like, good night.
Yep.
Oh, I love you too. It's just so funny to watch that. It's like sometimes that spur of the moment is just really, really funny.
It is. And particularly with Gene, he does that so well. I would love to have sat down with him at some point and say, hey, what was going on in your mind when you were writing this? But that was genius. That was genius. I can't believe it's taken me this long to realize that's what was going on.
So look, even you, I know I learned a whole lot going through this because this wasn't the movie I go to all the time.
Right.
It is now. I mean, I know this movie so far inside and out that I'm surprised I haven't watched it again during the podcast because we're watching it a minute at a time. But I'm surprised I haven't sat down and just watched it from beginning to end.
Well, you know, month and a half ago, my wife and I actually sat down and watched it. And she said it had been, 15 years since she had sat down and watched it. It was one of the times I was watching it. I don't remember. I remember her watching it with me at some point early on in our marriage. But it is a funny thing because I'd look at it differently, but I love this movie more. And even those rough 10 minutes in there towards the end really don't change the way that I see this movie.
No, I think all movies have flaws if you dive this deep and you spend this much time with such minute analysis. I do feel like the movie rushes to an end, and I think there's specifically 5 or 6 minutes where could you have just figured out a way to have just a little more care? But you know what?
Yeah.
When you watch it as a whole, it's such a fantastic movie.
It really, really is. And going back to those early minutes when we had, Dr. Ryan in here, and we were talking about that scene in the classroom where he jabs a scalpel in his leg. I mean, this movie from end to end is just awesome. And even with that rush to the end.
Well, you've answered a couple of the questions that we've asked some of our guests to consider that we've just gone through and listened to some of them. One of the questions I want to know was, did you learn something new about the movie? And apparently the whole no tongues.
Yeah, every literally every single recording session that we did, I learned something new, and I would bet every single minute something came out that I didn't know.
I have to be honest, I didn't get surprised in the episodes because of all the prep, but I learned something new about every minute going into each episode.
Right. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Say that. Absolutely.
Like, I wasn't caught off guard by anything necessarily, but I was amazed at the writing, the changes. I was amazed at what was rearranged script-wise, where I'm looking at the movie like, why are they doing it this way? And then you realize, oh, the script is different, and they decided to drop this scene, and they had to rearrange this scene and shorten this scene. And to me, to see that creative process of realizing they shot a whole lot of stuff, and they still had to make a movie out of it, and they had to leave a lot of stuff out to make the movie that we know today as Young Frankenstein. So I tend to learn something new about a movie every time I watch a movie. Mm-hmm. I'll pick up on something, a nuance, a line. I'll notice something that I didn't notice before because now that I know the movie so well, I can not necessarily maybe look at the actor. I can look off to the edge of the screen. You know, like when we discovered the mannequin in the in the lab, dressed like a cop, but it wasn't anybody because it just sat there.
Yep. Even when everybody else ran out.
There's always something to learn. So for me, I've learned how much more I appreciate this movie, though. I'll tell you that.
Well, and each guest that we had brought something else to the table as well. And I learned a lot from the different perspectives that were brought in. But I think that the care and concern that they had for the early works of the Frankenstein story and how they really wanted to tie in without using them as a punching bag.
Yeah, they never mocked the source material.
Never, not once. Now, they certainly found humor from those.
But they didn't. It's not like, again, we've said it during the podcast, it's not Dracula Dead and Loving It.
No.
Which mocked Dracula.
Right.
And it was actually even mocking the Bram Stoker's Dracula movie that Francis Ford Coppola had done just a year or so before.
Right. Or Airplane, where it's mocking every airplane movie that was ever made before that.
Airport,
yes, thanks. So the care and concern that they had, I think the labor of love that it was in many ways, and how Gene and Mel really went toe-to-toe a lot of times over what's going in, what's not going in, how something was going to be shot, how it wasn't. That, to me, was very interesting.
Oh, yeah.
And then a lot of the production stuff that you brought to the table that because I'm really much more of a casual fan. I probably know a little bit more just because I pay attention. And
yeah, but I will tell you, I was intimidated because of how much I knew you knew about this movie and how much you loved this movie. I was intimidated going into this movie when we decided this is the one we're going to do first. I felt out of my element for a while. I felt like I better get caught up.
Well, I think one of the things about this movie is that it's an easy one to get into. And
it is, but it's also so many layers.
There are so many layers. And sometimes you catch more of them watching it minute by minute. Some of them you only catch watching it end to end. And so to me, this is one of the most fascinating movies that I've ever watched. I really hope that, and even now, here we are, in August of 2018, we started in February, March.
Well, we started recording in early February. The episode started coming out in late March.
So remember when we started recording, we were talking about how Young Frankenstein was not on Netflix. It wasn't on Hulu. It is still not streaming anywhere. But as BK pointed out at one point, the rating has gone up on Rotten Tomatoes. And I haven't looked at it recently, but I don't know if that's attributed to our awesome fans or something else. But it still remains today one of the great movies, one of the great comedies, and it's hard to find.
Let me ask you this. Do you have a favorite gag or a favorite joke or a couple that just pop in your head when they say, what's your favorite part of Young Frankenstein?
Well, I think I've said this many times, but my favorite gag is when he says, he has that speech about we've got to be so serious, and then his collar
pops open. Boing.
That is probably my favorite of all time. Of course, the hillbilly hat is...
you have something about that hat.
I'm a hat guy to start with, but that hat, that may have been the one prop that was most out of place in this entire movie, but it just strikes me as funny every time I see it. And it was probably, in there? 30 seconds, 20 seconds. Maybe not even that, because he was wearing it when he was trying to lure the monster down the street, and then he didn't have it on when the cargo net fell on.
Right.
So it had a very short shelf life, but it really impacted me. And then the sedative scene, the whole scene of...
See, I was going to say, the
Planet-
charades for me was funny.
That was
It's still funny
awesome.
because you can watch any one of those four people in that scene and catch something that you missed before.
I may have watched that minute more than any other minute in preparation for this because I kept going back and watching each of the different people and then watching it again as a whole. And then I think there was a genius move that they did. And that is a minute or two later when Marty Feldman was getting choked by Dr. Frankenstein and he starts to do it, but they don't let it play out.
Right.
They stop it.
Because
with
Inspector
the door
Kemp is
knob.
at the door. Yeah,
That's right.
that's perfect.
So they alluded right back to it, but they didn't let it go stale.
Right. I
And
like that.
That was a great decision on their part.
No, I like that an awful lot. I
And
thought
in
that
the
was
script,
really,
it was
really good.
more drawn out, right?
In the script, they were going to do the sedative kind of, or the charades game again when they were trying to go into the cell where the
that's
Frankenstein's monster
That's
was,
right.
and he was going to get strangled because they thought, is he still asleep? And they started playing charades again about, the monster's still awake. I'm glad they didn't do that.
No, me too.
So,
well, how about for you?
For me, I mean, obviously, I do like the whole charade scene. I think that is really, really good stuff. I think when it comes to just because, like, for me, I like a lot of the maybe some more of the intellectual humor. I was always a Frasier guy,
Oh yeah,
I loved Frasier.
Great
I loved when
show.
you would come back around and the writing would catch you up. And the scene right after they tranquilized the monster and Dr. Frankenstein at that point realizes chances are Igor's done something wrong. And he goes, come on over here and sit down. And he sits on the floor. No, up here. And he's trying so hard to control himself. And remember, we had Susan Delmonico on that week talking about how a parent, sometimes you have to kind of like trick your kid into telling him the truth.
Right.
I giggle the whole time knowing what's coming. And to think that at one point he thinks, well, I told the truth, I'm okay.
That's right.
And then, of course, now he goes into the whole choking, which is what we talked about. So I guess for both of us, that whole maybe 4 or 5 minutes all kind of goes together as one of the funniest moments of the movie.
It really does. And you have the interconnectivity of all the different characters, and it really is a masterfully written and played scene.
One of my other things that I love, and again, this is very Frasier-ish, is when two characters are having a dialogue where the dialogue works, but they're both having a different conversation.
Right.
It happened early with the wolf, their castle, but the funnier one to me was, okay, I need you to elevate me. What, you're a doctor? Well, yeah, of course. Duh, the body's right here.
Absolutely talking right by each other.
That all the time gets me. I start to laugh because she does such a great job with it because she's almost mildly embarrassed but still considering it.
Oh yeah, right. Okay.
You know? Igor acting like a dog. Anytime Igor's doing his thing, that's funny. And I think probably the last like just guffaw moment for me was with the whole acting like Groucho Marx when they had Elizabeth showed up and he starts to eat her fox stole and he's like, down boy, down.
Yes.
And you almost see they had to finally use a take that even Gene's still kind of not quite holding it together. He's still got a little bit of a giggle. That's funny to me.
And that is another great scene where you have all the players all together. Well, the monster's not there, Peter Boyle, but you have that great ensemble working so well together and such great chemistry.
I think we've answered this already, but one of the final questions we wanted our guests to consider, and some of them did, some didn't, but sometimes when you analyze a movie a minute at a time, it can start to show too many of its warts. We did see some, and we spent time calling them out. But overall, sometimes you feel like maybe the movie's less now. Do you feel that way with this?
No, I really don't. And that was one of my concerns with this being one of my favorite movies. I was really hoping that I wouldn't destroy it along the way and that I wouldn't get to the point where I was like, oh man, I never want to watch that again. I could go home right now and watch it again. I have really come to appreciate the movie and the players in the movie a whole lot more than I did at the beginning.
Me too. I think this is one of those movies where because of that depth, because of the care, because of so much the quote-unquote literary aspects or the film aspects of the movie, I think there was so much there to appreciate and digest that the 4 or 5 minutes that we had some serious problems with how it kind of either rushed or they didn't make a whole lot of logic sense or just kind of felt, what was the word you used? It felt contrived at places. I think all the other stuff so much makes up for those 4 or 5 minutes that I'm okay.
Yeah.
I really, really like this movie. And I'm really happy that we chose this to be our first one.
I am too. I think that this was a good way to start, and I can't tell our guests how much I appreciate what they have added to this podcast this year. and the time that they spent to come on board. I mean, some of them, like us, time with family and, away from work and things like that, and to spend, 3 or 4 or 5 hours sitting down and talking through some of the minutes. And the stuff that they brought with them is insight either from their professional world or other things that they do, has really enhanced my understanding of the movie and really made it fun. I mean, we had a blast doing this.
I can't disagree. I think meeting the people we've met, having them on, getting their insights, gaining new Facebook and social media friends, and feeling like we're part of a bigger, wider community now is really cool.
Well, and on the, the Minute Makers group that we're a part of, now every single time, like I see Eric's name pop up or I see Pete's name pop up, I'm like, oh, what do they have to say? You know, it really catches me. And there are a lot of people giving some great input on all kinds of different things. But I really have gotten to be friends with some of these folks. And so that has made it a lot of fun, too.
All right. I feel like, Gene, I said at the very beginning, I feel like it's still now. I feel like I just want to keep talking because the more we keep talking, we know we don't have to end. But all good things must come to an end.
Or at least take a hiatus.
Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, but we're done with Young Frankenstein.
Yes, we are.
But you and I have made a decision tonight. It's funny because a lot of people have been asking us, what are we going to do for season 2? What do we do? What's the next season? What are you going to do next?
And we've been asking the same question.
We have. And actually, for those folks, a little inside baseball, we had our minds pretty much set on a movie until maybe 2 months ago. And then it started to whittle away a little bit. And then all of a sudden I started getting glimpses from you that you were considering going for a movie that you thought we should probably wait a little bit longer to do.
Yeah, and it's not going to take long in this conversation for people to figure out what we're talking about.
Choose your words carefully.
I am. I'm almost wanting to say, hey, Alan, why don't you just go ahead and tell everybody so we can talk about it. But one thing about Gene that is amazing and yet challenging for us is that he was a man of his time.
Mm-hmm.
And he had his thumb on the pulse of culture and yet had a great sensitivity to some of the wrongs in our culture. And he was able to express those in his work.
I think the best way to let the audience know what's coming up in season 2 is we could just probably play the Academy Award-winning song.
I think that would be very appropriate.
Why don't we do that? Why don't we play it right now?
Blazing saddle, he wore a shining star. His job to offer battle to bad men near and far.
There you have it. That's what we're doing. We're going for one of the big ones.
Yes, we are. Yes,
I know
we
the
are.
advice was, well, maybe with a show that has so many culturally insensitive phrases, words, and maybe you should wait a couple of seasons. You know what, Walt, you and I said we had so much fun with one of the big ones. How can we not do Blazing Saddle?
Well, and in some ways, it's almost like when J.J. Abrams had to deal with The Wrath of Khan as the second in the series. There are things in there that we've got to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a movie we've got to deal with at some point, but it has long been one of my favorites. And
you know what, though? I'm going to challenge our listeners.
And Bart was his name. Yes, Bart was his name.
I think we have listeners who get we wouldn't pick something to drive listeners away.
That's right.
We purposely wouldn't pick something. We're not the shock jocks that are trying to enrage and inflame. I think we're picking a movie that we understand the point of the movie. We understand the message of the movie. And I think I want to expand the audience and grow that audience in our current climate to say, oh, wait a minute. Maybe if I take a second and think about it, there's a bigger, wider message here, and I shouldn't be offended about what's on the surface because what's on the surface is to mock the thing that's being talked about.
That's right, and it will become more and more clear as we talk through this movie. But it was a fist to the face of the racism and insanity that was going on in the culture, and I think that the message of that movie is more important and more relevant today.
In some ways, I would argue that more people need to know the message that apparently Mel Brooks was trying to bring to that post-60s race riot, civil rights era, saying, guys, we're being stupid. You know your dad? Hey, it's just a movie.
Just a movie.
It's like, hey, you're being stupid.
Yeah, and in this case, it's not just a movie. It is a statement of an indelible truth, and that is the inherent worth of every person.
Right.
And
it's your actions, it's how you choose to act and treat each other that defines who you are, not anything else. Not the country you were born, not the clothes you wear, not your socioeconomic status, not your skin color. It's about who you are as a person. And if you treat people well and you work together, you can accomplish anything.
That's right. And even early on in the movie, we're going to have some fun with a couple of the minutes there where they were genius in the way that they just put a fist to the throat of racial bias.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, it starts from scene one and on, and some of the writing is so great. The list of characters is so awesome. The actors in this movie are fantastic.
If you have some kind of compunction against Blazing Saddles because you think, well, it's a bunch of white guys, Richard Pryor was one of the chief writers behind the script and was going to play the sheriff if it wasn't for some of his extracurricular off-the-set antics and activities that made him a little bit of a hot commodity. But you probably had one of the most diverse casts for a blockbuster film of all of 1974.
I would say so. Maybe of anything in that decade.
I am so happy. You have no idea how happy I am because we had thought we had kicked around 4 or 5 other movies. I thought we had whittled it down to one of the other pairings of Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder, but all of a sudden, in the last, like I said,
actually had.
Yeah, we had actually.
We had.
Let's say that because I had teased to Jeff Leboff. I said, well, it could have something to do with where the choo-choo goes, knowing Silver Streak. Like I was going to purposely mislead him because we had thought, let's do Silver Streak.
Yeah, which is one of my favorites.
Yeah, and I can't wait to re-explore that movie.
Yeah, I think that's number 3 of Gene's movies for me. I think Young Frankenstein and really Blazing Saddles is a very close second. And then
we got to do your favorite first. We're doing my favorite next.
That's right.
So you have no idea how happy I am. I almost want to start doing show prep now.
Well, I already am.
Are you really?
Well, and just, we off the air earlier, we were talking about some of the folks in there, and Cleavon Little played that part of the sheriff just so perfectly.
Yeah.
And
it's an all-star cast again.
It is. Well, and yeah, I mean, you look through this cast, we are going to have such a ball.
Yes.
Talking about even if it was just every episode was about the cast, it's going to be fun.
We've got to wrap this up. We've gone on. This is going to end up being our longest episode, but that's okay. It's our final episode. Our inaugural season comes to an end, but that doesn't mean the end of the Wilder Ride.
It does not.
In fact, we are probably going to have a couple of things coming your way. In fact, I know in 9 days from the date of this release, we will be on the 2-year anniversary of the passing of Gene Wilder.
That's really hard to believe.
We had a chance to sit down with biographer Brian Scott Mednick, author of Gene Wilder, Funny and Sad. We said we wanted to interview him. He had just been spotlighted recently on Fox News. He had been in a couple of magazines. His book had been out for a little bit, but they sort of circled back around to it. And I reached out to him, and just through the magic of social media, and he is actually one of our followers in our listeners group. He's become a fan of the podcast. Mm-hmm. We had a chance to interview him, and I told him, I said, I want to time the release of our Patreon episode. It'll be a free episode on Patreon. We'll bonus it here as well on iTunes and everywhere else on the website. But we have a great just sit down with a guy who spent 15 years putting a book together about the life of Gene Wilder. So I'm really looking forward to bringing the audience that coming up in 9 days after today. And then we'll probably end up doing a couple of maybe short iterations, not movies by minutes, but maybe movies by chunks.
Yes.
We'll do a couple of films it's like working out. Football players, they get the off season, but they still need to get the gym once in a while so they don't lose too much muscle mass. You got to still stay in the gym once in a while.
Well, and there's so many movies that you and I through the course of this year have said, oh man, we really would love to do this, and we just, there's no way. away unless we quit our jobs.
You can't do it by a minute.
No,
but we can
just
do it
can't.
by a chunk. We can certainly have the same kind of fun, just sort of bantering about some of the movies that we both love, or maybe even pick a movie we think this is horrible.
Yeah.
Let's just have fun.
Which that there is one that has been chosen for the whole group of the Movie by Minute team, and we are going to be recording over the next few days.
Robert Black, the guy,
Yeah.
Robert E.G. Black, who got the pictures of the former theater that now is a bookstore and a shoe store, is doing kind of a wacky version of the Movies by Minutes. He's just randomly giving people minutes to a movie that no one has probably ever seen or heard of. No background, no information, just look at the minute and go. And we're going to start recording that, I think, this weekend.
Yes, we are.
So
And
that'll be fun.
I know. I looked at our 5 minutes, and I thought, what in the Sam Hill is this? I have no idea. So we've got that coming up. I of course, am going to be on the Seinfeld Minute. You have another thing.
Well, I know Rocky 2 will start recording pretty soon.
So we'll be
and I will tell you
involved
this.
in that.
I know for a fact the Indiana Jones guys have asked if I will do one of the Crystal Skull minutes. I'm like, oh, good, guys.
I'm
Thank
sorry.
you. Crystal Skull. That's awesome.
At least it's something. So, yeah. And then and you can always be heard on WBHF.
Correct.
If anybody wants to listen to the morning news there.
Or my Saturday show, Waking
Or
Up
the
with
Saturday
Alan.
show, which is really a great show, and it's followed by BK on the Air, which Alan is often involved in.
Mhm.
And that's a fun show. A lot of movie talk, a lot of nostalgia. Every week, I really enjoy listening to that, so definitely tune into that. And then can check you out every once in a while doing some political talk on WSB Radio out of Atlanta.
Yep, a fill-in host for the big blowtorch, 50,000-watt blowtorch of freedom here in Atlanta, which is kind of cool to be able to switch hats, which, by the way, part of the reason we brought the podcast forward is I needed even a break.
Yeah.
I needed to stop talking current events, news, hard stuff. I don't mind that. I wanted to play, too. I need playtime.
Yeah,
and this is
been
playtime.
fun. Yeah. Well, and in the interim, over the next few months, if y'all would just take a minute or two to consider helping us out, that would be great. We've got a couple of things that we want to do that are going to cost us a little bit of money. Running the show costs us a little bit of money.
Got to host it.
You've got to host it. Got to have website, all that kind of stuff. So if you don't mind, take a minute just to go to patreon.com/thewilderride. Consider helping us out. Even if you just gave $1 a month, that would be huge.
Right.
There's
it doesn't have to be a lot. I don't want anybody feeling obligated, and I don't want to feel
No.
anybody like they've got to skip another bill. No, but if you got a little scratch line around, you don't mind, that would really, really help us out as well.
It would be a big help. And there's a convention every year that the Movie by Minute people have put together where there's an opportunity to do a live show, which we would absolutely love to do. There are opportunities to get more on the technical end. So that would be something that we have started talking about doing next year and being a part of. So that would help us out a little bit there too, travel expenses and the like. And we really, really appreciate everybody who's listening and commenting and being a part of our Facebook group at facebook.com/thewilderride. And then from there, the listeners group. Y'all have been fantastic. And there have been times when we have been busting our behinds on our other jobs and our families and just life going on and then doing this. And it's like, man, we just need a break. And it's like, no, this is fun. This is the fun part. And y'all have really encouraged us along through that. And I can't tell you how many times either Alan has sent me a text or I've sent him a text and said, hey, did you see this comment? Or did you see this 5-star rating that we got? And it really is meaningful to us that y'all are listening and being a part of it.
Yeah, and you can catch up at any point in time. We know some of you may have just now stumbled across it. It could be 2 years down the road and you're just now listening to the wrap-up of season 1. Doesn't matter where you came in. We want to keep these out there for as long as we can afford to keep them out there and keep them going. I mean, who knows how long? I mean, I know someone commented on 30-some items in the IMDb credits, but we weren't going to do any TV movies. We weren't going to do any TV episodes, but it's still 20-plus films of Gene Wilder. I don't think, and I'm pretty sure both of us realize we're not going to get to all of them, but we're going to do several at least of his big ones.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm really looking forward to season 2.
Yeah.
I would start tomorrow if we had time, but we do
The Wilder
need
Ride
break.
strikes back.
Yes. But I'm looking forward to some of the stuff we're going to do during our hiatus as well.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. So to learn all about everything we're doing, we're going to still be engaged in our Facebook page, our closed listener group. Like Walt just said, join us there, have fun. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on all of the podcatchers if you want to get caught back up. And again, the Patreon page, we're going to start having some content out there that you'll have to be a subscriber for some of it. The biography, it's going to be a free episode. Everyone's going to have access to it. So I'm just happy that we've grown what we've done in one season, being complete noobs, completely out of nowhere. Just saying, well, we could do it too.
Yep.
And we did.
Well, there's one other thing we need to mention. We are going to put a poll up. And
I got a poll.
One of the here?
It goes without saying.
We're going to put a poll up or something on our Facebook page, and maybe some of the movies that we're considering doing as a special episode, give people the opportunity to comment or vote on that, and maybe select out of that which movie we'll do.
That might be cool. Put 3 movies that any one of the 3 would be good for us, but say, okay, of the 3, which one would be a good Patreon show?
Yeah, and
that's a good idea.
Let y'all decide. Put us on the hot seat.
Right.
And so I'm afraid that if we say what movie should we do, we're going to end up with something.
Yeah, no. We got to at least have we'll at least create the top 3 of our list of things, and go from there. Walt, I can't tell you enough how much it meant to me to say, okay, I've got this harebrained idea. It's going to be so much work. I mean, the finance part, that's always one thing, but there's always ways to,
sure, you can work that out.
But it's the hours, it's the time, and then do you end up like being the band that splits up at the end of the first concert tour because they can't stand each other? I am so happy you were on the Wilder ride with me.
Well, and I appreciate the offer. And when you came up with this harebrained idea, I was like, I'm just the person to be involved in some harebrained idea. So
I'm just the kind of idiot you're looking for.
For once, it was actually productive and legal.
Hey, Dad, remember when you said it wouldn't amount to anything? Guess what?
I'm on a podcast.
Fooled you.
Well, and I always love when people say, when it comes up that I'm on a podcast, it's like,
that comes up.
Well, what kind of podcast are you on? It's like, okay, so here's what
you
it
do
is.
A podcast.
How do I explain this crazy thing? But I've been the same way.
About quantum mechanics. Yeah.
It's either real crime, politics, sports.
Everything that the Movies by Minutes guys don't ever listen to.
All the stuff that because we've mentioned a couple times, we're like, it's kind of the middle of football season. Oh, really?
Is that where they put the ball in the net?
Right.
What kind of net you talking about?
What? No, not lacrosse.
No, dude, I have had a blast.
It's been
so many
awesome.
late nights, so much work, but I'm telling you, when you find something you love, sometimes that's its own reward, and I have just absolutely loved doing this.
And I've been the same way, and it's been one of those things that it's like, I can't wait to get in there and start doing it.
All right, time to open some beers or some drinks, time to get the adult beverage, time to kick back, relax. You guys, in 9 days, we've got our episode coming up on the 2-year anniversary of Gene Wilder's death. If you're catching it live as the season is launched, if you're catching it in memoriam, in requiem, in whatever you're getting it. Oh, wait, are we gone? Are we dead? Hopefully you're not getting it in memoriam.
Yeah, hopefully not.
If you're picking it up later, then obviously you can go right to it and listen to it. But it's just been so cool to put this first season together. And you know what? We just hope we can keep building on the momentum of season 1 and keep doing the things that you guys like, that we like, and just let's have fun with Blazing Saddles.
Yeah, I'm already ready.
All right. Thanks for joining us on this.
Somebody's got to go back and get a load of dimes.
Somebody better get it. Load of dimes. The Petamay Thruway.
Well, I guess we have to.
Do we want to go ahead and do the movie right now?
Frankenstein. Yeah, let's just go ahead and start. Minute 1, roll it. Who's our first guest?
Thanks for joining us on this, The Wilder Ride.
Frankenstein?
It's definitely Frankenstein.
It's Frankenstein.
And Mrs. Frankenstein.
Mr. and Mrs. Frankenstein.
And the bride of Frankenstein's monster. And the poor leopard print pajama wearing monster in bed rolling his eyes saying, I just wanted to read the Wall Street Journal.
And Igor with his...
Dear God, I'm not a machine. What? Am I just a piece of meat to you? Is that all I am?
Yes. Yes.